Excellent.
Yeah. Okay, so
Good.
recording has started. Thank you so much, because we definitely wish to, repeatedly learn from this recording. Yeah, definitely. Yep. All right.
Will listen to
So,
your lecture here often.
Yes. So, okay. So it's 8 a.m. here in Japan. So can we start? So good evening and good morning to all of you. Thank you so much for your participation, Professor Unger, because we really wanted to have, this memorable event. We are, coming to, the end of this year's, research project, and then we wanted really big, with something, which would, commemorate, this year's, event and everything. So that's why we have invited you, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Right, so let's move on to the substance. Let me just share. And then first of all, my name is Hikari Ishido. I'm professor of international economics at Chiba University. Japan. Being an economist, I'm really interested in, subjective as well as, objective, aspects of, people's well-being, the standard of development and everything, and then, sustainable development goals, covering, well-being component as its, target number 3 or something. So I'm really interested in this issue of well-being. And then especially today, as applied science, background, person is going to talk about this, right, Professor Unger? So I'm really interested in today's topic. Anyway, let me just, share the screen. So just a brief opening remark. So thank you so much. This is an online seminar, Positive Political Psychology International Seminar, maybe the third one. Then the title is Measuring Well-Being Through Social Media Language. Sounds really intriguing. Let me cover the next slide. So this one is about our research background. So Chiba Studies on Global Fair Society. I will not read out everything. So our research focus is centering on the concept of fairness, obviously. And then we live in this society, global society, in which the concept of fairness as well as justice might be put in question. So that's why we need to sort of try to clarify what it could mean, that concept of fairness for our globalized society, with lots of different cultural connotations, heterogeneity in the 21st century. And then the third bullet point is about, this special emphasis will be placed on well-being and values, because fairness is intrinsically related to people's subjective judgment. So objective equality, for example, does not always guarantee a subjective feeling of fairness. So the vision of a fair society should include both objective fairness and a subjective sense of fairness. So we are planning to broaden our networks of academics across the globe. And then we have luckily been able to invite Professor Unger today. Yes. So our present team consists of an economist, political scientist, philosopher of law, and psychologist. So let us discuss across all these different field of studies today. And then here is today's agenda. So we have invited Prof.Lyle Unger, University of Pennsylvania, Computer and Information Science. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. So today's time schedule is as follows. Okay, so after this opening remark, we will go straight into this lecture, the most important part of today's session. by Professor Lyle Unger, University of Pennsylvania. And then the topic of his lecture or presentation is measuring well-being through social media language. So sounds really scientific as well as psychological. So I'm really intrigued by today's topic. And then followed by his lecture, we'll be having discussion time. First led by Professor Masaya Kobayashi, and then okay, maybe myself, and then some other colleagues will also be making some remarks, and then question and response time will also follow, and then we will be closing our session maybe in 2 hours time. So that's about today's on schedule. Would that be all right? So without further ado, always the case. So we wish to go straight into the
以上で、
lecture
私ちょ
part.
っと先にイントロダクションやろうかと思ってましたんで、
Yep.
アンガーのイントロダクション皆さんにしますのでいいですか？
Hi. Okay. So yep. So briefly, okay, Professor Ryle Unger is majoring in, of course, computer science, but he is very much interested in, going into this field of measuring well-being. So maybe from a, objective perspective, but obviously, well-being is a subjective, issue. So maybe he is going to link up these two, issues, subjective sphere as well as objective sphere. So would that be fair? I mean, as a very, very brief introduction.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So without further ado, we already wish to invite Professor Lyle Unger. Yeah. So the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So thank you so much, Professor Unger.
Yep. Great. Hopefully you see my screen.
Yes. Very clear.
So thank you so much for the invitation, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be able to talk with you. And hopefully we'll have some discussion afterwards. So I'm part of a team co-lead called the World Wellbeing Project. We sit in the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania. I show a picture of a bunch of the students who did much of the work here. Also, Professor Marty Seligman works with me there. And what I want to talk today about is how we can use language to better measure and understand well-being. I think that's a big topic and one that's very important. I'm going to talk really very much about measuring well-being in English and America today, but we're starting to do the same thing in China and Japan and other countries. And one of the reasons I'm excited to talk to you is I think now the techniques that we've slowly developed in English in America can be applied across the world. And I think it helps to both measure well-being and to understand it. And one of the questions I won't talk about, but I'm most interested in, is how do the contributing factors to well-being differ around the world? I think cultures are not all the same, and we need to understand how people differ. So my goal is simple but difficult: to use language from people to better understand what well-being is and how it varies across different individual people and across different cultures. And we look at language at lots of levels. Often we look at single messages, one text message, one tweet, one Facebook post, to see, are people happy or sad or excited? We look at conversations. I won't talk about these today, but we're looking at text messages. How do people talk differently to their husband or wife or to a stranger? How do depressed people talk differently? I will talk about people. People have traits. They're extroverted or introverted. We'll talk about those. They're neurotic or well-adjusted. We'll talk about those. They're depressed or not depressed. We'll talk about those. And we can measure at a much larger level. and having access to billions of tweets lets us look at variations across the US or across the world in how do people show their well-being different? How does it change over time? We watched during COVID as well-being went way down and is now happily coming up again. People are happier now that COVID is gone, not surprisingly, but we can get more detailed measurement. I'm both a psychologist and a computer scientist, and I'm going to talk today about tools, language as a tool for measuring things. And over time, people start with little telescopes and build bigger ones and bigger ones. And in some sense, I want to build telescopes, measurement tools to understand people through their language. And I think that's a great way to understand people. When you talk to someone, when you send a text message, you reveal something about what you're feeling and what you care about. Of course, you don't say everything. People rarely say, I'm feeling so depressed, or I really don't like you, or lots of things people happily don't say, but they still reveal something about themselves. And so we can use language to measure people. And I'll give you lots of examples. In psychology and in political science, people have for 100 years asked questions. They take surveys. How do you feel about this candidate? What do you care about? Who do you want to vote for? What's important to you? And that's nice if you know what question to ask, but it's also expensive and slow and hard to do every month. And increasingly, we have large computers which have measurements from Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Reddit and TikTok and all these platforms that people are communicating on. And in some sense, these are an alternate to surveys. They're not the same, but they allow us to give a different measurement. If I have your Facebook and your Twitter feed and you're using them, some people do, some people don't, I can know more about you. And in some sense, people, we say in America, sit around the campfire, they talk to each other, they chat, and in the everyday conversations you have, you reveal what's important to you. What are you talking about? What do you care about? What are you worried about? What are you excited about? And so what I want to do today in the next hour is to give you some examples of how we can measure well-being from people and how we can maybe even understand well-being differently through language. And that will set the stage for future work for asking questions of how does well-being differ across countries? Hopefully this is clear. Feel free to interrupt with questions.
Thank you so much.
So what do I do mostly? I say, do you use Facebook? Yes, thank you. May I have your permission to download all of the posts you've written on Facebook? Will you take a survey? Are you male or female or don't want to answer? How old are you? Sometimes how much money do you make? How educated are you? And then take a survey to measure your personality, to measure your character strengths, to measure your depression, to measure your happiness. So I then have for tens of thousands of people, their language from Facebook or Twitter, and also the images they post, but we won't talk so much today about images. The language people use and what questions did they answer to measure their personality, to measure their well-being, to measure their happiness, to measure their health. And so what I'll show you today is a bunch of studies correlating the language people use and the answers they give to questions to try and understand how do people talk differently who have different personality or well-being. So the basic idea, take Facebook statuses, count the words in them. We get lots of numbers of how often each word shows up. These days, we also fit fancier machine learning models, but I won't talk much about those. We have then their survey responses. What did you say about how depressed you are? We correlate them. We then look at them and we can understand something about how the languages language people use predicts well-being. So let's start by looking at a typical word cloud. I'll show you many, many of these. This is Americans talking on Facebook. It's the words they used correlated with how extroverted they are. It's a standard personality, one of 5 factors of personality. And in all of these pictures, the bigger the word, the higher the correlation with extroversion. And the more red it is, the more frequent it is. The more blue or gray, the less frequent. So what is extroversion? At least how does it show up among Americans? Extroverts are people that like spending time with other people. They like going to parties. They like other people, being with other people, boys or girls. These are gender controlled, age controls. They tend to use words like amazing and can't wait and love you, and lots of slang, lots of things that are not quite standard American. Gettin' instead of getting, a more casual, more informal piece there. Lovin', doing things. So, 3 O's, 4 O's, very excited. This is a style of talking of people who want to go out and have fun with lots of people, right? And it's funny because these are people who can't wait. And in normal English, it's C-A-N apostrophe T. But these people are being so excited and they're typing their messages on Facebook, they're dropping the apostrophe. They're excited to do things. Make sense? Sort of nice. So what's the opposite of extroversion? Something, and one is not better or worse, but a different personality. The opposite is introversion. And these are about 10-year-old data that I'm showing right now. What do American introverts talk about? Interesting, lots of Japanese culture, right? Manga, anime, even the word Japanese, right? So there's some things that are, Japanese culture is very popular among introverted Americans. What else do we see? Things like drawing, reading, books. These are things that you can do by yourself, right? They're introvert activities, working on computer, the internet. These are, again, introvert. We were talking before we started, some people like to work alone. It's nice to be in my office and be quiet and get some work done without 30 people bothering me. That's an introvert, right? Introverts also tend to use hedge words. Apparently, I'm apparently doing very well, rather than I'm positive I'm doing very well. That's more extroverted, to be sure of yourself. Introverted, a little more hedge words. Doctor Who, okay, that's a very American British, but that's a show that introverts like. Reading Wikipedia, a little bit, unfortunately, introverts are a little more inclined to be depressed than extroverts. So mostly introversion is good. Academics, people who do science, tend to be more introverted. Extroversion would be salespeople, people who have to deal with people for a living, right? But if you're scholarly, you need to be a little introverted because you need to enjoy time on your computer and reading books. If all you want to do is spend time with people, you're not going to be a good researcher. Make sense? So note that we see something about the life of introverts and extroverts from the language they use. Good? Good. Let's look at a second personality trait. Being neurotic, not good, correlates with depression. What do neurotic Americans talk like? Well, first of all, they swear. That's a very American trait. Most of the world, and Japan too, doesn't swear as much as Americans. They are sick of things. Note that our definition of word is fairly loose. I statistically group together pairs of words that show up together, like sick of, like my head. These like mental health, like tired of, like why do I, like leave me. These multiple word expressions give more clarity. So in English, sick means that you're not feeling well, but sick of means that you're tired of it, you don't like it. So more neurotic people are, I hate, they're swearing, they're alone and bored. They rarely say the word depression or depressed. It's not very socially acceptable to say, I'm feeling depressed. Most people don't say it. Americans say it way more than Chinese, and probably more than Japanese. I don't have the data in Japan. But even in America, people rarely say, I'm depressed. But if they do say it, they're more likely to be neurotic. The opposite of being neurotic is being well-adjusted. And you can say, what do well-adjusted Americans talk about? And some of these things we know. Americans will see over and over are very religious. If you talk about the Lord, or God is good, or in Christ, or the church, or praise, in general, religious Americans are more well-adjusted, they're more agreeable, they're nicer, they're happier. Religion, and this is maybe an American trait, it's not so much true in Europe, which is much less religious, or China, or probably Japan. I mean, only a few parts of the world, the Arab world is very religious. But in America, you see religion, and what you see are sports, soccer, baseball, the Lakers, the name of a sports team, soccer, volleyball, snowboarding, San Diego, which is a city, but here it's a sports team. So well-adjusted Americans talk a lot about sports, not just sports they do like the gym, where we know that exercising is good for you. Exercising is almost as good for treating depression as taking antidepressants. And it's just a good thing. But these are people who are watching sports. Well, okay, that's interesting. Why? I don't know. I have a hypothesis, but watching sports is often something you do with other people. It's a way to connect. It's something you talk about to make connections. And we need to do more studies to understand it, but it seems at least plausible as an interesting hypothesis that involvement in sports is a way of getting out of the house, meeting other people, connecting for both introverts and extroverts. And it's something we see in the language. Make sense? Good. How well do we do? We can correlate how well our language predicts. In the blue, predicts the 5 factors: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. I showed you 2 of those. And how well, if you have a friend on Facebook fill out the survey question for you, how good a job can your friend do in estimating your personality from a questionnaire? And the answer is the Facebook language computer model, just as good as your friend in terms of estimating your personality. So it's not super accurate, but neither is your friend. Tells you something about personality. Cool. What does this say about well-being? I sit in a positive psychology center. We have a website called Authentic Happiness. My collaborator, Marty Zeligman. We've had about 1 million people literally come to the website. On the website, they can take questionnaires. They can, if they wish, share their Twitter. We can then, with their permission, correlate the language of their tweets with what they said when they filled out their questionnaires. And what do people who are scoring high on these 5 pieces of positive emotion score? Positive emotion, loving, happy, exclamation point. Americans like being excited, high arousal. So in America, positivity is highly correlated with excitement. Now, this doesn't have to be the case. You can be happy and calm and peaceful. In English, we say being Zen, right? Concept obviously stolen from Japan, but most of the Americans are not very into meditation. They're into being excited. They like being engaged, loving people, being excited. Globally, positive relationships are one of the two things that matter for well-being. What do people who score high on the surveys with positive relationships? Love, birthday, my, you, friends, family, baby, daddy. Okay, that's relationships in America. By the way, they can be different across countries, but you can see similarities. The other big component of well-being is meaning, or meaning and accomplishment. And what gives meaning in America, but not in much of the world, lots of meaning comes from believing in God and Jesus and having blessings and faith. And accomplishment comes from being proud, from winning, from doing a great job, from your daughter and your baby, right? And these amazing people you're with. So what do we see? We see positive emotion, love and being happy. We see positive relationships. We see meaning through religion in America. And we see accomplishment by being proud of both me and my daughter and my family, my baby. All showing up with language, right? Again, so far we've taken surveys correlated with language, but it means now we can also look at your language in your text messages, in your tweets, and say something about your well-being. We can also look at the other side, people who score low, negative emotion, sick, hate, tired of, swear words, I, negative relations, swear words, hate, why, people. The word people is funny. I thought before I did this that people would be a positive word, a relationship word, but that's not the way it's used on Twitter. Positive, friend, family, daughter, wife. Negative, people are annoying. People are stupid. People in English is a distancing word, not a close word. People is other people, right? So this is negative. Disengagement, the opposite of engagement, being bored. Lack of accomplishment, bored, tired, sucks. Lack of meaning, why? The other thing to note, and we'll see this a lot, we see this in many languages, the opposite of good relationships is I. If you're talking about yourself, I am tired. I don't see meaning in life. I don't like people. Positive is much more we, much less I. And that's one of the pieces that is fairly universal. Focusing on yourself is mostly not a good thing to do for well-being. It's a measure of lack of well-being. And therapists often say, you're depressed, go call up a friend, do something. Think about someone besides yourself, right? So we can see this in the language of lack of well-being. We also, on the Authentic Happiness website, have people take questionnaires to measure their character strengths. And there's a whole bunch of these. I won't cover all of them, but these are things like teamwork. People who score high on questionnaires for teamwork talk about the future and the office and come on, and some religion and some father and networking. People who score high on leadership are, and you can think of the people you know who should be doing, they're managing things, they're doing challenging parts, they're doing presentations. These people also tend to travel more. They're going to London and going abroad and staying in hotels, and things are well done, right? They're forward looking, they're looking to next weekend. So you can look at the language of people who are high on teamwork or leadership. Contrast that with different character strengths. People who are high on kindness talk about their best friends. They're sorry to hear the bad things that have happened to someone else. They send hugs to people, right? This is their language. They bring in cupcakes. They're well and laughing and hello, and acknowledge frustrating, right? People who are high on zest. What is zest? Zest is passion, things that are great. There are people who are thinking about wonderful in the morning and the countdown till things are happening. They're looking at beginning, they're thinking about their staff, what's important. These are exciting, right? So again, we see these different sorts of character strengths. Difference between a more leadership, a more teamwork, a more kindness, caring, charity, friends, worrying about everyone else, things are lovely. People who are more excited. We see these different character strengths in language. Nice to measure. Cool. So that's the first piece. The second piece I want to talk about will be depression, to try and look at understanding a lack of well-being, something that's very widely studied, to see what language does there. Then I'm going to shift to empathy, which is a much less well understood character trait and behavior. And then I'll talk a little bit about regional variation and how we can measure well-being across space. So depression, again, ask people permission, collect their Facebook posts, have them take a standard depression measure, questions that are asked by doctors or psychologists to measure depression, find the correlation. So what are the words that show up most with depression? And here I'm going to show you a bunch of clusters. We've used a method called latent Dirichlet allocation, a topic method that clusters words that tend to go together. Doesn't matter, but it's automatic. So we have sets of words. We see words indicating sadness, crying in tears, broken heart. We see words of anger. We know depressed people tend to be more angry, more hostility. You see again the people. Note that people is a negative word on Facebook and Twitter. This is other people. We see words of loneliness, which goes a lot with depressed people tending to be lonely. We see people thinking about stuff over and over, rumination. We see feeling sick, headache, body hurting. All of these are known symptoms. And by the way, one interesting open question is how much do these vary across cultures? I've looked mostly at the US and China. In America, depression shows up lots with depressed mood and loneliness. People tend to have a more psychological aspect of depression. In China, people go to their doctor saying, my head hurts, I'm sick, I'm having a headache, I'm feeling pain. They have more somatic body symptoms of depression. One question you can ask as a third culture I haven't studied, in Japan, and maybe it's different from young people versus old people. I see in India, this is changing. Young Indians look more like Americans. Old Indians look more like Chinese people. How much of depression in Japan, maybe for young and old people, is depressed mood or anger? How much is physical? Makes sense as an interesting question to measure. And I worry that if we go cross-culturally, if we develop all of our scales in America, we forget about things that are true for Americans, but more true for Chinese and maybe other cultures. Oh, and medical references, right? Talking about hospital and pain. Cool. So let's try and understand more about what we can get in detail with different facets, pieces of depression. And I'm going to show you correlations of language with two sets of questions. One set of questions about low mood. I'm often in the dumps. I often have frequent mood swings, or the opposite of, I seldom feel blue. Blue means sad, right, in English? These are low mood measures. And then I will show you measures of low self-worth. I do not feel comfortable with myself. I am not pleased with myself. I dislike myself. And what we'll see in these language is that people don't say I'm depressed or I dislike myself, but they use language that lets us understand that this is the case. That makes sense? So we can ask, first of all, what language do people use when they're sad, when they're having low mood? interestingly, the most predictive word is alone. If you're on Facebook, people rarely say, I'm depressed, I'm suffering from depression. That's gray because it's rare. If they do say, I'm depressed, then they have low mood. But what do they say more? They say more, I'm alone. They swear a little bit more, it seems. So we see this aloneness, this symptom of depression, reflecting a socially acceptable way to express bad mood. That makes sense? So again, I worry these are culturally very American, but in America, you're not supposed to say I'm depressed, but it's okay to say I'm alone. I'm watching TV, I'm on Facebook, and this is a symptom of potentially of depression, along with lots of other words. We can also ask low self-worth. If I think I'm not a good person, what do I say? I don't say I'm a bad person. I ask the word why. Or I say, I don't feel this, I don't believe this. You can also see, unfortunately, some of the introvert words, actually, probably, something. So if you have low self-worth, you tend to qualify. I'm probably doing well. I'm actually doing well. These are ways of not really being confident, right? If you had high self-worth, Americans like to brag, much more so. Japanese, not so popular, but Americans like to say, I'm a good person. I did a great job at my work. I'm very American. So if you say, I probably did a good job in America, that means that you probably don't think yourself as good. You're not being polite, as you might be if you were Japanese, right? Again, this is so American, right? But the same techniques can be used in any language in any country, and that's why I'm so excited by them, right? And maybe helps give a bit of understanding of American culture, right? Apparently, I'm apparently going to see my friend today. I'm apparently getting my job done. These are all insecurity, not believing in yourself. Good? Good. So that's depression. Let's look at one last trait, one that's not been studied so much, but an interesting one for well-being, and one that we're interested in because we're trying to build chatbots that are empathetic and fake feeling. Can we measure empathy, caring for other people? Can we understand it better? So we gave a bunch of people, a couple thousand people, a questionnaire to measure empathy, and we took their language. In the middle are the word clouds. Empathetic people use the word love and so much, and feel and my and heart. And around it are the topics, the clusters of words. Empathetic people, so miss you. They miss their sweetie, babes, moi. This is more of a kiss, this is more of a younger person one. There's love and soul and amazing friends and family. There's unconditional. There's a perfect friend and wonderful. There's missing people and relationships. There's true love. Okay, there's lots of empathy. This looks sort of good, right? Although one could also wonder, there's also a bit of I and me, which is a little suspicious. Empathy is about caring for other people, right? It's me feeling you. It's not about me. Empathy should be about you. Can we understand more? Well, there are whole books saying empathy is bad. You shouldn't be empathetic. How could this be? I just finished a paper. I recruited Paul Bloom, a well-known psychologist at Yale, to help a paper arguing that you can measure both good and bad empathy. That feeling for other people could be good or bad. How could that be? Empathy should be good. You should care about other people. Relationships are good. But we think there's two kinds of empathy. There's good empathy, thinking about other people, caring about other people. There's bad empathy, feeling someone else's feelings. And that sounds like it should be good, but doesn't happen to be good always. So good, I should think about you. I should try and understand what your problems are and try to solve them. I shouldn't feel your pain. I should not get too excited and worried about your problems. I should try and help you solve your problems, do things well. That's all good. Helping other people, really good. What's bad? If I catch your pain, if I get excited and worried, if I'm a doctor and I think, oh, if I give you that shot, it will hurt so much, then I don't want to give you the shot because it's painful. I feel your pain. So we want to be able to help other people, care about other people, be compassionate, but not to necessarily get overwhelmed with the pain of other people. So we now have a set of questions to measure good empathy and bad empathy, beneficial and depleting. Now we can tease apart the components in language. So questionnaires for good empathy. I often have tender, concerned feelings about people less fortunate than me. That's good. I try to imagine how other people feel. Good. I tend to make other people's suffering my own. Bad. Other people's sadness or upset is contagious for me. Bad. Right? So we have good empathy, caring about people, bad empathy, feeling other people's pain. Now, what does the language correlate? Here's the good empathy. And this again is American sample, right? I apologize, such an American talk, but that's it. It's wonderful family and children and blessed. It's caring about the homeless people in America. It's having a great day. It's loving your friends. It's overcoming challenges. That's good, helping people overcome them. It's life and beautiful things in the world. It's keeping perspective. It's unconditional love. It's a wonderful world. It's trust and worship and glory and bless America and blessings, right? These are all good things, family and children. So we saw this before. Empathy is good. What's bad empathy look like? What does catching someone else's pain look like? Well, first of all, bad empathy is about I and me. I'm supposed to be concerned with you, but I've caught your pain. And now, instead of worrying about you, I'm feeling about me. It's people. Remember, people is bad. People is other people. It's pointless drama about people. It's pain. It's things that may look good. My sister and my friend and the tears and the laughing. But it's also mood swings and depressed mood. It's good things like friends. It's bad things like missing. Again, this good and bad mood. Some things are good. This kissing and hugging and laughing and cuddling. Much more complicated, this empathy. And I think an open question is, should I, with my wife, maybe have more of this sort of feel your pain? That's what she says. Maybe too much of it's bad. Certainly if I'm a therapist or a doctor or any helping profession, if you have too much feeling someone else's pain, you burn out. You get tired, you can't do it anymore. You can't go in and deal with people dying of cancer every day and feel their pain. If you feel the pain of every cancer patient, you end up feeling about I and me and myself, and not good. Make sense? So we can tease apart these pieces. We can also then ask these same people survey questions, people with the compassion, the good empathy, less time volunteering, more time giving money to charity, less missing work, less drinking on work nights, which mostly is not healthy, and less stress. People who feel other people's pain, more time volunteering to help. That's maybe good, but doing it, less giving money, more missing work, more drinking at night, worse health, and much more stressed. And if you're in a stressful job dealing with people's pain, if you're a psychotherapist, if you're a doctor, you really want to be over on the compassion, caring, not on the feeling someone's pain. Good. Okay, we have 15 more minutes. I want to shift for the last piece to talk about something very, very different. I've talked about measuring individuals so far. Now I want to talk about measuring whole regions. The US is broken up into about 3,000 counties. Each one's a little color there on the map. About 2,000 of them have enough people to actually measure data. Many of them are almost empty, just farmland. America is very big and very empty. So it's about a sample size of 2,000 counties. We collect Twitter from public pieces. We map it to the county. We then take data collected by the government, the Centers for Disease Control, our main medical group, or the US Department of Commerce, Department of Census, which does a survey every 10 years. So we have government collected data on health outcomes and well-being outcomes. We have life satisfaction. We have Gallup surveys. We have other ones from the government. We have what you die of, heart disease. We can now take the language used in a county on Twitter and satisfaction with life or mortality from heart disease, and we can see how do counties differ in their language based on how happy they are or how healthy they are. Make sense? So I've shifted to the county level. These are the topics, clusters of words that most correlate with well-being across US counties. Two of them in red at the bottom are counties with low well-being. These are counties that are bored and tired. What do counties talk about with high well-being? Personal training, meeting, conferences, suggestions, ideas, donating money. Counties that are wealthier, but especially within the wealthy counties, the ones that talk more about donating money, happier. Information management, good jobs, building compassion, caring about people, experiences, going outside, going to the ocean, going to the mountains, going camping on the weekend. These are communities of Americans that have more well-being. They are doing more outdoor things in nature. They are working with other people. They're donating more money. Oops, let me get my back. There we go. The other piece for the last piece here is that well-being ties to health. And lots of people say, oh, asking people if they're happy or not is the wrong measure. We care about something real and solid like living or dying. And it's the case that in the US, there's very little money for studying well-being and lots of money for studying health. Americans want to be healthy and live a long time. We'd like to live as long as the Japanese do. Not there for a lot of reasons, but can we actually measure something about language and health outcomes? So again, we'll take the Twitter language, map it to a county, and now correlate it with mortality from heart disease, dying from arteriosclerotic heart disease, hardening of the arteries. And we can now say, what is it that predicts counties, not people, counties with more heart disease? And we see lots of things, but I picked the ones that are more psychological. In counties with more heart disease, there's more hate and drama and negativity. There's more swearing and anger, hostility. There's more boredom and tiredness. Now, note what I'm saying here. Your neighbors are being negative and swearing. You're more likely to die of heart disease. Right? This is a county level piece there. Lower heart disease on the positive side, people in your community are talking about conferences and customer management. People are talking about great food and friends and company and fantastic weekends. People in your neighborhood are talking about opportunity and overcoming problems. You are less likely to die of heart disease. So the community has a culture varying across the US. And if we look at how well this works, we take the Twitter, map it to there, take the language, predict heart disease. How well can we do? We can look at CDC, our Centers for Disease Control, counties with more heart disease in red or less in green. The white ones don't have enough data for good things. And we can compare that to our predictions. Pretty similar. How good are they? What is it that predicts dying of heart disease? The standard things that epidemiologists use. What's your race and are you married, male or female? Males have more heart disease. That predicts a bit. Smoking, diabetes, hypertension, obesity. All of them predict dying of heart disease. Not surprising. If you can pick one thing to live longer in the US, be educated. Money's not bad. That's got a lot more prediction power, right? Wealthy, educated people are healthier globally. And if you put these all together, it's almost as accurate as having Twitter. Twitter captures so much about the community that it knows not just education and income, but lots of behaviors of the culture of the community. So we get a strong signal here. I won't talk about it. We've used similar sorts of measures to look at things like voting, where we find that who is it that switches, which counties switch to vote for Trump? Ones that were pessimistic about the future. In areas where people think that the future looks bad, they vote to change the government. Not surprisingly. Also, if they're poorer, but that's less predictive than pessimism about the future. Good. So that's really the summary of what I have to say, but I wanted to say a couple words about what else I'm working on, just because I hope to have more connection with you guys in the future. The biggest thing I'm focusing on is to measure cultural variations across different cultures and to try and understand how happiness is or isn't the same in Japan or China or Mexico or India, across cultures. On the whole, Japanese people are on average less happy than Americans, given that Japan is a wealthy, well-run, stable government. You expect unhappiness in Africa or someplace with terrible problems. Japan's a very successful country, a wealthy country. People are less happy. Why? I don't know. Maybe because people put less importance on being happy and more importance on helping their family and helping their neighbors. I was talking right before we started, Americans are twice as lonely as Japanese. America is a much more individualist culture than Japan. We tend to do our own things and try to be happy, which, by the way, trying to be happy is mostly not good. You should try to have good relationships. You should try to have meaning in life. Trying to be happy is the wrong way. But it's an interesting question. What does happiness, what do Japanese people, and of course you're all different, like Americans are different, what do people value? Is depression the same? Do symptoms show up the same? I don't know, but I know in China, more physical pain and stomachache, less I'm sad, I don't enjoy my job anymore than America. Shame we were talking about. In America, people like to say, I'm so good, I'm proud, and Americans hate saying I'm ashamed of doing this. In Japan, I'm told by my collaborators, people don't like saying I'm so good, I'm proud of how smart I am. They do like saying I'm so ashamed I didn't do a better job. Very different of what's acceptable in the culture. In America, higher arousal, more excitement is good. We want to be positive and we want to be excited about it. Exclamation points. I don't know, maybe Japan is, I think, positive. We want to be positive, but maybe calm is good. Maybe being satisfied and content is good and being excited is less important than America. I don't know, but I think to measure these things, they're minor technical details. Most people in Japan speak Japanese. Most people in China speak Mandarin. Most people in America speak English, although we speak lots of languages. That's uninteresting. More interesting is, what do people care about? Are they caring about taking care of their parents, their children, are their coworkers? What is their value? And what is it they want? What does well-being mean to them? And then can we measure it in ways like using language? That's my biggest piece. The other piece, I don't know how it is in Japan, but in America, everybody just talks about ChatGPT. These models, So ChatGPT is a new product. It has, in the last month, 1 million new users. You can type it any question. So right before this meeting, I typed it, please translate the following into Japanese, and you can see the translation. I don't know if it's good or bad. I sadly don't speak Japanese. I could ask it now. It's a conversation. I just said, what is ChatGPT? What is it used for? I then said, please answer the question in Japanese. Here's what it said. Okay. I said, in 4 bullet points in Japanese, how might I use ChatGPT to increase well-being? Here's what it said.
Makes sense.
So what do we have here? We have something that can hold a conversation. It's not very smart, but it has sort of all of the web, and it's able to hold fairly good conversations. I asked only in English because I only speak English. I could have asked in Japanese. You could hold a conversation in Japanese. And I think this is going to change lots of interventions in psychology, and in particular, the one that I'm working on with many collaborators is, can we build a version of ChatGPT to help people do well-being? Most well-being exercises are write down 3 things you're grateful for, which is great. It helps. Or write a letter to someone thanking them. There are many things you could do, but if you could actually have a private person to talk to, a chatbot that would help give you advice, that would guide you through exercises, that would help you, I don't know how, but now the interesting question. It's too expensive to hire for everybody in the world a private coach to help them deal with their problems, to help them figure out what's important, to help them move forward. Can we gradually build chatbots that help, at least in little pieces, for people to do a better job of increasing their well-being, of reminding them to have lunch with their friends, of asking them what's important, what do you want from your job, have a conversation. And I think we'll see in the next few years lots of these coming out very quickly. The technology is frighteningly good. It's a little scary because many people are now using these instead of having a real person. You can talk to your waifu and you can have a surrogate friend who's not a real person. Maybe funny, maybe not. But I think it's positive and negative, but mostly, I'm a positive psychologist, mostly positive. So thank you so much for your attention. I look forward to discussions. I look forward to working with all of you over the longer term. And I look forward to questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Lyle Unger, for your really thought-provoking discussion and introduction of this issue. I mean, topic for today. So I learned quite a lot. Oh, Chinese people are less, expressive about this. I don't know, internal aspect, but rather than that, they try to focus on this physical somatic type of oh, I learned that. Okay, what about Japanese situation? Okay, rather than asking directly to this issue, yeah, I would like to maybe later invite Chinese comment and then
and we have Chinese experts. They should tell me if I'm right or wrong, right? I wish to be humble. I'm just starting the international comparisons. And I have many collaborators who are Chinese, but this is still new.
Right. And then we also have, participants from Mexico. So later, maybe we can have some, comments and questions from across the
I'm very interested in doing also Mexico. I think it's for me, that's sort of the big cultures I do. Well, ones with lots of speakers: China, Japan, Mexico, India. Although India is too complicated, and English speaking. Those are my big ones.
Right. Well, thank you very much. So rather than me asking you questions at this point in time personally, I would like to invite our research collaborator, a research colleague, Professor Masaya Kobayashi. He's a political scientist as well as, I guess, sort of a psychologist, because he, goes very much deep into this, positive psychology and well-being related issues. And actually, Professor Masaya Kobayashi Kobayashi is the one who actually took initiative and then invited yourself, Professor
Thank you.
Unger, this time. So rather than, me trying to explain Professor Kobayashi's, study field, we wish to invite him directly for him to, make some introduction of his own study field in connection definitely to what has already been talked about by Professor Lyle Unger and his contribution, generally speaking. So can we already invite yourself, Professor Masaya Kobayashi, for your discussion?
Yeah, thank you for introducing me, and thanks for Lyle for a very inspiring presentation. I will a bit first explain or summarize your present talk to Japanese, because many Japanese members know little about your works at first. 今日のライル・アンガー先生のお話を少し説明をいたしますと、私がポジティブ心理学についての、研究を始めた後ですね、ライル・アンガー先生が、日本にいらっしゃって、非常に親しくなりました。そして、アンガー先生はお話にあったように、ペンシルベニア大学の、ポジティブサイコロジーセンターにいらっしゃって、そしてマーティン・セリグマン先生の元の研究チームの一員でいらっしゃるんですけれども、しかし、アンガー先生はその中でも特にですね、エンジニアリング、コンピューターサイエンスと、そういったところに非常にお詳しくてですね、心理学中心の研究チームでいるんだけれども、その中で非常に科学的、技術的な方向とポジティブサイコロジーの、研究というものを結合する点で最先端の研究をされています。で、今日お話になったようなソーシャルメディア、例えば Twitter とか、あるいは Facebook を通じての、研究が最先端のものになっているわけですけれども、まさにその技術的な最先端の、立場にいらっしゃいます。で、我々のチームもそういったことを今後したいと思っていますので、後ほど、技術的なところはですね、石戸先生からのご質問があると思うのですけれども、私の方はですね、理論的な問題について、少し、これから質問してみたいというふうに思っています。で、今日のアンガー先生のお話は、基本的に、そういったソーシャルメディアを通じて、したがって言語を通じて、調べるという方法と、それから心理学の伝統的な質問票を使っての方法というものが非常に対応していると。で、場合によっては Twitter などを通じての予測の方が他の要素よりもより高い予測率ですね、を示しているというようなこともお話になっていて、まずはじめに個人の方では、例えば心理学でビッグ5という性格についての研究、それからポジティブサイコロジーのセリグマンが提案したパーマについての研究、そして新しい研究として、良い共感と悪い共感という、概念を通じての研究、そういったものを紹介され、その後に、コミュニティ、アメリカではカウンティレベルでの、研究、それも、ソーシャルメディアの言語を通じての、調査と、それから実際のですね、疾病ですね、客観的なデータを通じての、研究、これが非常によく対応しているという、そして場合によっては Twitter の方がより良い、属率すら示していると、こういうご研究を、紹介してくださったわけです。そして、最後にですね、文化的な相違についての今後の、研究のフロンティア、そして、チャットボットですね、GPT を通じての、研究をフロンティアとして紹介されたというのが今日の、お話でした。Thank you for waiting. And
thank you for the nice summary. That was very.
Thanks very much. I enjoyed your talk quite well. And so, as Professor Ishido introduced at first, I will a bit talk about our project. And perhaps you know, I'm trying to integrate or bridge positive psychology and political philosophy or political psychology. And then after making conversation with you, I actually sometimes with a collaborator like Professor Ishido made papers, and that was published fortunately. So we are proposing the concept of a positive political psychology that tries to bridge the two. So we began to make these kinds of international seminar. We are very happy to invite you as the third presenter on this topic. And so my present question is the 2 points. One point is that you very clearly explained your main works between positive psychology and social media inquiry or text analysis. So the point is that obviously positive psychology or such kind of psychological investigation have clarified various points to the world. So I wonder, what is the new point which Twitter analysis or social media analysis or text analysis clarified the point which was not found by questionnaires? Some of your present talk, like empathy, is very fresh to me. So I suppose such kind of arguments or new findings have been already done by your team and such kind of investigation. That's the first question. And the second question is that I'm very interested in your research on county level or community level, because county community is quite related to social or political dimension.
Yeah.
And also, I have known that your team has already done great works on the election through social media language and inquiry. That's one of my first priority of our research team, because I have already made some progress in making research on the relation between Japanese election and, for example, positive psychology and so on. So could you somehow briefly introduce your findings to the Japanese audience, because it will be facilitate our project team. I hope that we can collaborate with you on these points. The one point is social media language. The second point is election. And I would like to also hear from your frontiers on the cultural variation. We have already done spoke a lot. So I am very happy if you will explain us that what is the present stage of international collaboration and cultural variation. That's my third question. Yeah.
Excellent. All great questions. So the first question, what do we get from social media that we don't get from questionnaires? I think there are two answers. One is, for a questionnaire, you need to know what to ask. If you know what to ask, you get a good answer. If you don't, then you don't. And so, for example, when I looked at well-adjusted Americans, I was surprised to see how much people talked about sports. Now, I know that sports is very important in many cultures, right? Well, I know because I see that Japan shows up in the sports news here too, right? But I didn't know that I hadn't thought of, and people had not thought of sports as being part of well-being, right? People think about exercise, right, as being part of well-being, but they don't think much about sports. That for me was an interesting hypothesis generation. And it's common in the marketing world to have focus groups. You pull together 20 people, you pay them to ask questions. How do you feel about something? A car, a product, a politician. In some sense, what I get on Twitter is or Facebook, a very large focus group. It's not a random sample of people, but it's a bunch of people. What do they say? What do they say about this? What are the comments about this? If you want to know what people think about Xi or Biden, then Twitter's not a representative sample, but it's a very cheap, very fast changing, what are the reactions to this, right? And we're seeing a lot of press now in France. They're trying to raise the retirement age. Lots of protests there. You could try and do a poll, and people are. right? Macron is worried because there's a lot of contest there, right? He thinks he has the right solution, that people are getting older, they should work longer. Other people are burning stuff in the streets. Can we do a very quick understanding of what people are arguing about in France by monitoring what they're saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's so much more expensive to send pollsters out and ask questions, and it's not even clear what the questions are that you should ask. Why are these people? From my perspective, I didn't understand it until I talked more to French people. Americans don't feel so negative about working longer, right? We'd all like to retire early. Not me, I like working, but there's something different about France. There's a belief in a welfare state. So I think one thing is to get answers quickly to questions you didn't think to answer. Make sense?
Yeah.
The other piece is that polling is very expensive. And in the US, you can get detailed polls at the state level, but the counties are expensive. It's hard to have details. Not surprisingly, we often don't know the outcome of an election until after they count the votes. And I always think this is crazy. We're spending tens of millions of dollars on polls, and we don't even know what president the county will vote for, let alone more detailed questions of what people care about, what they're happy or not about. It's much cheaper to measure Twitter. We can't get tiny counties, but for 2,000 counties, we can get enough tweets to at least see, are people talking more about this, less about this, right? So what you get is an ability that's much more fine-grained. It's not the same quality as a Gallup poll. I love the Gallup polls, they're very good. I love the US Census, they're very good. We have a very good census department, but it's too expensive to ask everybody every question. And even things that I think are incredibly important. How lonely are Americans? No one has done a good poll across America to measure loneliness. People, insurance companies, health companies have asked small samples, 100,000 people, but not enough to have a representative sample, not to know how much for sure it's varying, not to know the age effects. Lonely people, the loneliest people are mostly people 18 to 25, somewhat surprisingly, or people over 80 who can't leave their house. But can we get the details? How is that changing? So note that there are lots of things you wish you could do a poll on, but it's expensive. And if you want resolution, how is it different in the cities versus the countryside? Many countries, I don't know about Japan, but I know about China and the US, the cities and the countryside are different worlds. They're different income, they're different concerns, they're different social relations. There's different, are you with your parents or not, right? Well, we need to have measurements that take these things into account. To just group a whole prefecture together with the city and the surrounding countryside, no, it's not the same people. The 60-year-olds and the 16-year-olds, not the same people. So again, I wish I could do polls, but they're too expensive. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So more detail and answers to questions you didn't think to answer.
Thanks.
So second piece, county level politics. I think the question we've asked mostly is, what causes people to try and vote out the incumbent? In general, if you're in power, you stay in power unless somebody is unhappy about you. And now the question is, more precisely, what forms of unhappiness do people have? What do people care about? The classic economic argument is people care about how much money they have. And if the job market is bad and they can't find a job, then they vote for change. And if the job market is good and they have a job and they're making money, they stay. This is not a bad approximation. There's been better studies in Europe than America, because Europe is a whole bunch of countries. You get more data. You can look across countries, lots of elections. This is true. The economists are right.
Mhm.
But it's a little more subtle. And what we see in America, and I think we will see also in Europe, is what really matters is how optimistic people are about the future. In America at the moment, things are very strange. People are mostly thinking, I'm doing okay, my job is okay, but the country is going the wrong direction. We're going to fall apart, there's too much dissent, the economy is unstable, AI or China is going to steal our jobs. Mostly people worry about China, they should be worrying about AI, but they're still insecure. And note that even though they're currently having a good job, unemployment is very low right now in America. But people are worried. And when they're worried about the future, they vote for change. So note this is now a psychological change that says that people in economics did the first pass, which was measure dollars or yen or RMB, good approximation, but that's not the bottom line. To mix a metaphor. What people really care about is not just the money, it's how well they think the things will be doing. And now we have a more psychological basis, which ties to money, about the future. And that I think is interesting, and there's lots of room across different countries to measure what are the real psychological factors that drive elections. And the way that we looked at mostly is who votes for incumbents, who changes their vote, who used to vote for one party but now votes for the other one, right? So these shifts. And America, of course, had a very big shift when Trump was elected. Many people were unhappy about the way America was going, and they voted for radical, crazy change. Some of them wanted to vote for Bernie Sanders, a socialist, radical change. The majority went to Donald Trump, a radical change, maybe too radical. Many of us didn't like it, but I have a more optimistic feeling about America, right?
Right.
And many people, we don't love Biden, but if you think, oh, things are going okay, keep the guy. He's okay. So that's a psychological story, and one that I think needs lots of work over the coming years to say, what are these big psychological components that drive voting, and how can we measure them? Finally, cultural, I'm just starting. For the Japan side, there's a woman, Jeannie Tsai, at Stanford, a cultural psychologist, who has collaborated. She started in China, but now also in Japan, has done a number of studies on ideal affect. So she's a close collaborator, has collected lots of tweets. And her theory is that in America, people want positive, high energy, excitement, high valence, high arousal. If you violate that by being negative, you get more press. And in Japan, people want positive, low arousal. You want to be calm and positive. If you violate that by being more excited, you get more retweets. And she calls that ideal affect, that these are how the culture wants to be perceived. And she's now collecting and will help her analyze not just general tweets in Japan, but also comments on news articles. What comments on news articles in Japan get more attention? And her hypothesis, what we haven't tested, is if it's more excited and positive, it will get more attention. If it's calm, whereas in America, being negative will get more attention, right? So it's a question of what draws attention. And in some sense, if you violate the cultural norms, do something different, that draws attention. So that's sort of my main piece. And then I think trying to look at questions like, but less political, shame. In America, talking about shame violates the norms. In Japan, you may feel bad being ashamed, but you're much more happy to talk about it. And this to me is interesting in terms of what one wants to be and how you talk. If you do surveys, Japanese say they are less conscientious than Americans say we are. This is ridiculous. You started the meeting exactly at the top of the hour. If this were America, it would have been 3 to 5 minutes late. If you look at behavioral measures, Japanese are very conscientious. People show up on time, they do what they're saying to do. America is rather more relaxed. Brazil, Mexico, way more relaxed, right? But the surveys don't confirm that. What's happening? I think when you ask a Japanese person, are you conscientious? You look around to your friends and coworkers and say, well, not as much as he is. He's much better. Plus, I should be modest. It's not good to say how conscientious I am. If you look at Americans, we look at other Americans and say, ah, yeah, compared to him, I'm only 5 minutes late. I only missed one meeting last week. I'm very conscientious. Plus, I'm an American. It's good to say how good I am. So note that having behavioral measures often gives you something that you don't get from surveys. And my final point, language is more of a behavioral measure than a survey. So my hope is that you may actually see some language, what people are doing, not just how they think they should answer the questionnaire. So that's a very long answer, but thank you. Such a nice set of questions.
Oh, thank you very much. I enjoyed your answers. And so from my point of view, your research on the macro level is very, very beneficial for Japanese, not only researchers, but policymakers and governments for considering what to do in terms of well-being. So is there any example that public institutions have already used your kind of analysis? And also, I wonder, I have already read your articles on the Trump election. Is there any development after Trump, for example, the election of Biden or so?
So let me answer them in reverse order. No on the Trump, but there have been nice studies in Europe by my collaborators, not by me, that are very good. I can send you, if you email me and remind me, if I'm not taking notes.
Right.
The European one is very good, not mine, but very good. In terms of government agencies using it, in the US, only the state of Washington, which was very interested during COVID in trying to monitor the well-being and how it changed. So COVID had a huge negative effect on the population. And the question is, can we measure the psychological well-being of the people in the state and what their concerns are with respect to COVID? What are they worrying about? And so, so they used our work. We've also been talking to INRIA, which is the Census Department of Mexico, the country of Mexico. They're not using it yet, but they're very interested. Mexico has way less money for doing census measurements than America does. It's not as wealthy a country as the US or Japan, obviously. And their question is, can they do some of the measurement that they wished they could afford to do if they were America or Japan? They would do more surveys, but they're not as wealthy. So they're trying to use Twitter. They've used it for some things to track tourism flow during COVID. So you can see by loading where the English language tweets are traveling, where tourists are. So it's a way of monitoring tourism, which, as you would have guessed, has had a big hit during COVID and is a much bigger part of the economy there. But that's the sort of piece where they're moving toward is can they find big signals like tourist location or big shifts in well-being due to exogenous shocks, we would say in economics, things like COVID. So not a lot of uptake yet, but I think interest, is where things sit right now.
Well, thank you very much. I hope that we can collaborate in such a direction in the future.
Would be great. And I'm very much working now to do all the things we're doing also in all the, well, the 5 biggest languages, but including Japanese. So we're very much setting up to run all these things across lots of languages. So it'd be great to work together.
Yeah, thanks. 石田先生お願いします。
Hi, thank you so much. Professor Unger and Professor Kobayashi for your really thought-provoking sort of a dialogue. So as an MC, I have to move on, but I have my own, personal and a bit technical question to Professor Unger. Would that be all right? Because I'm really, I was thinking like, okay, so maybe, what could be the cultural difference between, the US and Japan in terms of, responding to, this question of whether you are happy or you think yourself as a conscientious person. Maybe, so my way of thinking is that, US society is kind of like an open loop thinking society. So you can just, speak out what you think directly, because when you have some kind of a negative repercussion, you always have this new frontier, new cities of escape and everything. But here in Japan, as an island and high density population density country, we really don't have escape cities to go to. I mean, so we have to sort of anticipate this envious repercussion, negative kind of repercussion. And so in anticipation of these negative feedbacks or repercussions, our initial response is already like cautious or understated. So technically speaking, will there be are there any sort of statistical or information technology technique dissecting between this initial direct sort of speaking up component and this preventive or cautious sort of repercussion, or anticipating is a type of understatement. So basically causality can be unidirectional, but in the case of this closed loop way of thinking, maybe the causality could be bidirectional. You know what I'm talking about. So that's why maybe when I say I'm a conscientious person, then I would already anticipate some kind of a negative or envious repercussion from this high population density community. So I would say no, I'm not that conscientious as my colleagues, and so it's understatement. Although of course I might say, okay, I started this session on time and I woke up and
Right. Yep.
No. So any statistical or IT technology which can disseminate, dissect these two impacts. Sorry about this technical question.
No, great question. So let me start with a little background, which we're looking at.
Yeah.
The cultural psychologists distinguish individualistic societies and collectivists.
Right.
So the name that they'd apply to exactly your story is that Japan is much more collectivist. And collectivist society, on the one hand, you take care of your family and your parents and your neighbors. On the other piece, you're also stuck with the same people forever. This is your small island.
Yes.
In America, if you don't like someone, too bad. Go away, not my problem. We don't believe in having enemies like some countries do. Either you're my friend or I don't talk to you. So we have this sort of non-attachment, right? For better or for worse. In a collectivist society, it's your mother. What do you mean you're not going to talk to her, right? It's your responsibility as a son to take care of you, right? There's this connection that you're always there. And because of this inescapable connection, relationship management is central.
Yes.
More important than anything else, right? So that's the first piece. Now the question of, is there IT ways to do this?
Yes,
I don't know. Let me shift now to China, which I've looked at more, which is also a collectivist society compared to the US. And what my Chinese people say is that understanding what's said in any given statement in Chinese is much harder than in English. In the individualistic English language, each sentence is self-contained. It's a low context language and a low context culture. When you say something, and America is a country of immigrants, you need to be able to talk to someone. If you look at my research team, They're German and Chinese and Surinamese and all over. They all speak different languages. That's a very international group. It's very important in that culture, that American culture, to be very clear and direct. In a collectivist culture, life is high context. When you talk to someone, you know something, or if not, you want to have dinner, you want to meet their parents, you want to meet their, right? It's knowing the background. And so when you say a given statement in a high context culture, the information's not in the statement. You need to know who you're talking to. You need to know the background. So this is the psychology story. Now the question, which I have not yet done, is we should be able to actually show this with our computer models.
Yeah.
I haven't done this. It should be the case that many American statements, the computer reads the statement and the meaning is clear. In a Chinese statement, and I think Japan will be very similar because Japan is a collectivist, high context culture.
Yeah.
To understand the statement will require knowing more context.
Yes.
And that means in some sense that things like ChatGPT, this is a low context American product. It doesn't know who you are. It doesn't know your relationship. It doesn't know what you care about. It doesn't know your parents. All it knows is the statement you put in, right? It's a very low context.
Right.
So there should be computable measures of how well can I estimate anything about someone, but their intent, their concern, their feeling, their beliefs should be harder in Japanese than it is in English, if you believe that theory. So that's my hypothesis, but I have not tested it yet, but we should.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that remark. So let us collaborate possibly.
Yes,
on
I would
that
love
kind
to.
of new frontier issue. Yeah, thank you so much. Right. So we still have 20 plus minutes, and then we are a group of citizens from across the globe, more or less. So it's a precious occasion to ask questions to a professor, who is very knowledgeable on science and well-being. So any comments or questions from the audience, please, at this point in time? You can identify yourself and then ask questions or type in. Yeah. I know there is a participant from Mexico. Hello. And then, yeah, China. Yes. Okay. Hello. So you can show up. Yes, you can just show up on screen and.
Of course. Just a second.
Yeah.
Oops.
Okay. Hello.
You see me?
Alfonso.
Please.
I don't see myself. I don't know what is happening. But
Yeah. We
Perfect.
see you.
Okay.
You're there. You're good.
Okay. Well, thank you for the presentation, Professor Unger. I was thinking about some practical applications of your research for having a fairer society, like thinking about the group. So I thought that identifying words and sentences related to personality traits, like you do, like neuroticism, depression, etc., could be useful to show specific health ads in people's social media. Like instead of just, we are used to get ads from products and services that we like search for, but maybe related to this group, it could be very useful to relate the words, the sentences that you have found, and to show people some like health, like some help. I don't know, maybe psychiatric help or maybe a specific social groups, etc. But that's what I thought. I mean, it's very interesting and it's a lot of information what you have shown, and I just wanted to relate it to the group. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I would love to have the ability to both provide people, I think, not psychiatric care, which is too complicated to do by chatbot, but at least help and advice to make this available. Most people have cell phones now. We can give them access to lots of information in a way that's more chat-based. The other piece I would love, as you say, not to sell people products, which they mostly don't need, but to have something that's much more of a targeted, wouldn't you like to go for a walk now? I see based on your schedule, you have a half hour till your next meeting. Or last time that you had lunch, you enjoyed it with this person. Why don't you haven't put a lunch on your calendar for a while? Why don't you call this person up? I'd love to see ads or chats or cheap communications that encourage, well, healthy behaviors. But for me, I'm much less interested in telling people not to smoke. They all know smoking is bad for you, but to help them to remind themselves of, here's how to take the time to go for a walk. Here's the time to talk to your friend. Here's compliment someone. When you're in the shop, say something nice to the shopkeeper. There are a million things you could sell people that are free behaviors that do not cost money, that make people more satisfied and happier with their lives. And we don't have a good infrastructure. And I think the fact that everyone pretty much has cell phones now means that if we can figure out how to target these in a way that's useful rather than annoying, where people opt in and say, yes, this is what I want to do. This is my goal, right? So they say I want it. Then I'm hoping we can help build chatbots that target them at the time they want, in the language they want, with the frequency they want, gives them helpful reminders that they want. So I would love that. I think the cost of these things coming down is great, and the benefit should not go only to Google and Amazon and Facebook and TikTok, which mostly do not make people happier. It should go to actually increasing well-being. And if the cost comes low enough, it means that you could almost have a personal trainer, which is a wealthy person's luxury, available for free on your phone, which should be something affordable to everybody to help them be motivated to exercise. So my fantasy is we really have very cheap interventions that people can say, this is my goal. I want to walk twice a week, a half hour, and the app helps them do it. So that's our next big mission, is to start building these apps and testing them.
That's
Awesome.
great. Thank you very much. Very interesting.
All right, thank you so much for that question, Mr. Alfonso. You are in the field of community development in Mexico, so that's why you asked that question, right? Okay, thank you very much. So yes, and we okay. So yeah, Dr. Zhang, our research collaborator, Dr. Zhang, if you yeah, you're from China, right? So
Yes.
any question? Yeah, please.
Yes, thank you, Professor Ishido. Thank you for introduce me. And Professor Unger, thank you for your presentation today. And I am a Chinese, but now I live and working at Japan. And as you said that your team is also analyze Chinese well-being. About Chinese well-being, I have two questions for you. The first one is, as a Chinese, I'm very interested in which social media your team used to analyze Chinese well-being, because as you know, Chinese does not allow the use of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, that kind of the international social media. However, some people can use the special software to help them use the international social media. And this is my first question. And my second question is, in the well-being analysis about Chinese people, which results impress you? Yes, that's my...
So the first one is easy. We use Weibo.
Oh, Weibo. Oh, okay.
I would like to use WeChat, but the security is much too tight. So Facebook is very easy to get. Everybody can share things. WeChat has very good security. And even if people want to share their WeChat with me, it's not easy for them to do that. But Weibo is easy for people to do. And we use the same sort of techniques in China we do in America. That is, there are lots of market research firms. And what market research firms do is they pay people to take questionnaires and to share their posts.
Okay, thank
And
you.
so
I
the
think-
same thing that people use who are trying to understand products, right? The Chinese markets use, we use to understand, to try and measure well-being. So that part is relatively easy, and it's controlled, it's tricky. Obviously you can't ask questions about political government, but I'm not interested in that. And there are some tricks that make it easier because China is very happy with Hong Kong being ambiguous. So Hong Kong, of course, is part of China, and Hong Kong also tends to support many of the American companies like Amazon Web Services, and so we can run servers in Hong Kong that are both in China, and so we're allowed to check to grab Weibo and are accessible to the American infrastructure, so you don't have to have as many Chinese accounts. Does that make sense? So that was relatively easy, and there's always problems with data sharing, but that's it. What have I found? Not much yet, we're just starting. We started looking at individuals, not well-being, but individualism versus collectivism. And everybody talks about America versus China. America's individualistic, China's collectivist. But in fact, not surprisingly, China's a very big country. And there are substantial differences between the regions that were historically wheat growing, northern, and the regions that are historically rice growing. And this is also, by the way, true within Japan. We replicated these findings in Japan. So you can look at different regions and say which regions 50 or 100 years were mostly wheat, which ones mostly rice, both in China and in Japan. Collect Weibo in China, Twitter in Japan. And now look at the language, look at how people are talking, and there are substantial differences. And you get in the collectivist regions much more small community. In the individualist, both things I would have thought, more consumer goods buying, and more talking about Beijing and things that are international. And my first thought was, why is that? But collectivist is your local community. It's not we in China. That's not a collectivist view. Collectivist is your community, whereas the more individualistic parts of China actually are more engaged with the nation. Make sense? The other piece we're starting to look at is urban-rural. There's a huge difference, and starting to see what are some of the concerns of people in urban versus rural regions. And most of them, I think, are obvious to anybody in China, but I hadn't realized as an American how challenging it is in the large city to find an apartment for your parents, that you need to take care of them, and real estate's very expensive. And it's a trivial finding, but I think in terms of these questions of where this is going, I think that if you think about governments and people concerned about community, trying to see what are people worrying about, this is something where one could do a more detailed analysis of how much is the Shanghai versus Beijing versus the smaller cities, right? What are the different concerns? We have not looked in detail there, but I think that's sort of the direction, is to try and understand more about what do people in different groups. We've also trying to understand stress. What are people stressed about? Mostly it's the obvious. China's a very exam-oriented country. Not to say that Japan and the US are not also exam-oriented, but we see a lot more concern about exams, and a lot more concern about in a rapidly changing, rapidly growing wealthy country, will I miss the rise there? So the answer is, at the moment, I don't have anything good to report, but we're really still in the first stages of setting up the infrastructure to do some surveys, to quality control it, because lots of people just do the surveys for the money and don't really answer honestly, and to then collect Weibo and do some more analysis. So very early results. Thank you.
Thank you for your
Okay.
answer. I think the Weibo is the good choice because many Chinese people use Weibo. Yes.
And it's relatively easy to collect.
Yes.
And it's like Twitter, it's fairly public. There's an API and you can share, anybody who wants to share their Weibo with me can.
Yes.
Right? So there's no one in the government the government has some privacy. You can't take all of China's Weibo outside the country, but mostly it's fairly easy for people to share their Weibo with any researcher.
Okay, thank you. And I'm looking forward to your research in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Unger and Dr. Zhang. Okay. So, yeah. So we have other participants. Yeah, either from Japan or from again maybe China. Yeah. So any other free. I mean, issues, right? Free talk agendas or issues that you'd like to table at this point in time? Yes. It's a precious occasion. You can ask questions in Japanese. 日本語でも大丈夫ですよ。せっかくですから何か。
Soon we'll have speech to speech. So Microsoft Skype has some now products where you can talk in English and it comes out in Mandarin.
Yes.
Not perfect, but it's getting there. So I think pretty soon we'll be able to do this without so much language. I feel so bad that I don't speak Japanese. It's hard.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So any comments or questions? For example, Li Shan 先生、何か言われますか？どうですか？いかがですか？ Okay.
一つよろしいでしょうか。
Yeah. Okay, please. Okay, please. Okay, put on your. Okay, please.
Oh, sure. First, I'd like to say thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I'm so sorry to say that my laptop does not have a camera attached to
no
it.
problem.
Okay.
I will imagine you.
Thank you so much. So your talk is fantastic and wonderful. And I did some text mining before, so I'm really feel your research is very useful and has a very bright future application. I'm just wondering if the knowledge you mentioned can be applied to the human behavior prediction.
Yeah, it's interesting. Give an example, please.
Yeah, for example, like you talk about the emotions and the 5 big emotions characteristics. So maybe that kind of knowledge can be used or applied in human decision prediction. For example, like how people decide to shop, how people decide to make certain behavior. So I'm just wondering if that is also possible to do that.
People have done some targeted advertising. If you're an extrovert, show an ad with you and 10 people playing together, show it as something with a big crowd. If you're an introvert, sell someone a game that you play by yourself, something you can do by yourself. So there is some work there. Mostly personality is not so useful for predicting marketing as what you have bought in the past. So the big companies mostly use what did you click on, what have you bought in the past, better than most of the language. So people have tried, in Britain, they tried selling car insurance. If you have a conscientious personality from your Facebook, we'll give you a discount because we think you drive better. But that only lasted a few days. People thought that was very intrusive, that was violating privacy, even though people volunteered to share their Facebook. So I think one thing to realize is there's big cultural differences in terms of how comfortable people are in sharing. I think in America, people are much more willing to share their social media. In Britain, in Germany, people are more private. They think that it's not right for a company to access their social media. So I think there's a big question here of consent. And I think there are big differences across cultures in terms of how happy people are to have their information being used. I also think that if people know their information is being used to help them, they might be more positive. But it's still unclear to me when these things are used and where they're helpful.
Right.
So I've also thought less about selling things. I'm more interested, I'm a positive psychologist. I want people to have meaning in their life and good relationships. And I'm less interested in, although I did work briefly at Google, I'm less interested in selling them stuff. But yeah, I think many of the same methods are used. I think the open question is for predicting behavior, often measuring behavior is the best prediction. What are people buying? Where are they going? Who are they talking to? So I think one wants to have not just language, but actual behavioral measures. And what I see companies doing more and more is using actual behaviors. What do they know from your phone? What do they know from your shopping? And less of the language, but has some signal. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Professor Unger and Dr. Rishan. Okay, Dr. Rishan, I believe you're very much interested in this behavioral economics, right? And then the
Yes.
prospect theory and everything. And so you are trying to see the connection between behavioral economics and this positive psychology, yeah, and well-being. Yeah. So right. So any other comments or question to Professor Unger in Japanese? That's fine. 日本語でも大丈夫ですよ。
Can I ask one more question?
Sure, please.
Right, okay. I wonder whether there is any influence of recent change of management on Twitter or Facebook, like social media. Do you think is there any impact or influence on your research?
Facebook, no. Twitter, yes.
Oh, really?
Twitter, it was free to get 1% of all the tweets in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So for a decade, we collected 1% of all the Twitter and sometimes more.
Mm-hmm.
So very cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's become tremendously expensive. Twitter is now
Really?
charging $10,000 per month.
Mm.
Currently, there is no academic discount.
Right.
That's now $100,000 US a year. That's a lot of money to spend to collect data. It's really going to make a huge difference. And so I think if this happens, it's going to be very hard to do well-being research or political science research because the cost is just prohibitive. If you're a company, if you're Microsoft, 100,000 a year is nothing. But for an academic, this is a large budget, right? And so, yeah, I think it's really unclear how that's going to go. I think we're thinking about changing to have more people be willing to let us do text messages and communicate by text message. I think it's an open question. We look at Reddit where people post things, but that's not as, Twitter is really global. Apart from China, everywhere in the world uses Twitter. And so I think there's a big open question now of how can we cost effectively collect data? And maybe it's going to shift away from monitoring Twitter toward measuring comments at news sites, which we can grab in the US and Japan, where people have comment pages where they do things, but that's a very odd set of people. Most people in the world don't actually bother to read news articles and comment on them. Maybe it's something that involves much more open-ended polling. So one thing we've looked at is asking people just questions. How do you feel about the economy? Right? And just take the text and we can process that, which is an alternative from asking a fixed polling question, right? Because remember, I want open-ended questions. So it's a period of uncertainty.
Really?
But I think that Twitter may change their mind and decide that they care about supporting well-being, or they may decide that they just want to make money and they don't care about helping. It doesn't cost them a lot to give us the tweets. And in some sense, it benefits them because we then publish methodology companies can use. But clearly Elon Musk's current concern is not sponsoring academics. It's how
Right.
does he make money tomorrow?
Mm.
And it's going to be a big problem for that measurement. So I think we're looking for other ways to collect data.
I'm worried about this point because the usage of social media is sometimes expensive can be in the future. So I
Yeah,
wonder,
so that's a big worry.
right. So whether there is any differences of analytical predictivity between using Twitter or using Facebook, is there any difference you feel?
The methodology is very much the same.
Right.
The topics covered are different. We found surprisingly that we do roughly as well estimating depression from people's Twitter or from their Facebook. So we have people where we've collected both from them and then measures. Closer than I would have thought. Surprisingly, there's a fair amount of political discussion on both Twitter and Facebook. Amazing number of Americans get their news on Facebook.
Yeah.
We used to measure influence by looking at what newspapers were read in a given community. Americans don't read newspapers anymore, mostly.
Right.
Everything is online. It's Facebook, it's YouTube, it's TikTok. And so it's harder to measure it. But all of these media have lots of pieces. One thing we're thinking about, TikTok, at least in America, is enormous. And TikTok is providing APIs to download TikToks. It's much more expensive to process because this is audio visual rather than text. Twitter's cheap. I have 1 billion with a B tweets. I can afford to process them on a university computer that I own, the university owns, right? TikTok, I'm going to need more compute power. But I think that's the way things are going, is more of this multimedia piece there. And people are commenting and watching TikToks, and it's measuring something. So I think that's the next question, is how do we do processing in these other pieces where it's much less obvious? The words you use are a much clearer indication of what you believe than the videos you record. It's harder to look at your face and tell what you're really thinking, at least for a computer. But I think we may have to do, so I don't know. We'll see.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Right, so okay, we are coming to this, concluding part. Just a few minutes left, but thank you so much for your really insightful contribution today. I was thinking, okay, hearing your last part of your last part, of your comment that maybe okay, so maybe some kind of a cross cultural and collaborative research networking is necessary in a loose sense, right? Because if it's too rigid, then of course formatting and templating and takes a lot of time, and then we cannot go anywhere. So maybe if we could start. I mean, Professor Kobayashi is very much spearheading our research project in terms of well-being. So if Professor Kobayashi and ourselves could collaborate with you into the future, about this line of investigation, using IT technology for measuring well-being, that would be wonderful. And then we are actually in the process of applying for some kind of a big scale Japanese standard big scale research grant. So if we could include our kind of collaboration, then higher probability of that research proposal being accepted. So that's what we would like to do.
That would be wonderful. So we are collecting and processing Japanese tweets, and we are building technologies to translate English collections of words into Japanese, so we can have comparable. There's always this problem of what's the same sort of words in Japanese versus English. We're building, my students in computer science are working on pretty successfully, I think, on ways to translate these. So I think many of the features like moral foundations or positive affect that have lexica words in English, we can now run equally well in Japanese. It would be great to collaborate on some of these. What are the measures of well-being we would like to measure in Japan? And I think it would be great. We have tweets, but it would be nice to have outcome measures to correlate them with. either at the regional variation level or at the individual survey level, right? And I think those are ones where it's difficult from the US to collect Japanese outcome measures, right? Either individual or your equivalent of county level measures. So I think that'd be great. So I think those two pieces of how can we see which of the American results replicate in Japan and which don't. The same way we looked at individualism, collectivism across China and now in Japan. And to look at, we're looking at individualism, collectivism, that would be nice. And to tie to your pieces. And I would be happy to help you if I can, you know, my resume or something would help you get a grant. That would be a pleasure to share.
Yeah.
And maybe we can then, you know, it'd be fun for me to visit and be able to.
Yes, definitely. So thank you so much. Yeah, Professor Kobayashi is the very person who is, you know, trying to apply for this, you know, big scale grant, and then also, you know, prefectural level. We have prefectures here in Japan, so he has undertaken, you know, this prefectural level surveys, rather big scale, and then we have come up with some, you know, research articles. Yeah, we are now working on the second one. Just by the way. So yes, so there are plenty of lots of issues we can, you know, collaborate on. So let us do so then. Thank you so much. Time is now up, so we have to close today's online session at this point in time. But okay, so lastly, thank you so much, Professor Lyle Unger, for taking your time to explain to us about what you have been doing over the past years. We wish to learn from this recordings, and also, you know, maybe we'll come up with something in writing. And then for clarification, we would like to ask you at a later stage, okay, can you possibly confirm on this, okay, in writing?
Yes.
Just briefly, your brief meantime. So thank you so much. So please, everyone, join me for giving a big hand of applause to today's contribution by Professor Lyle Unger. Okay, digitally also.
Thank you so much for the questions. Wonderful questions. I very much appreciate it.
Yeah. So let us stay in touch, definitely, and then have a good dinner time, Professor Unger. You said, you were expecting a dinner time, right? And then please have a good night. Yeah. Okay, so let us collaborate. Yeah, Professor Kobayashi, is that all right?
Oh, thank you very much, Lyle. And please give our best regards to your collaborators in your center. I would like to invite the other members in the future. Thanks.
Sounds great.
Right.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so that's it for today. So thank you so much. Bye-bye. Okay. ありがとうございました。ではこれでおしまいにいたします。Thank you so much. Okay, everyone. Thank you.